Alcatraz, famously known as the Rock, earned its notorious reputation during its time as a federal penitentiary from 1934 to 1963. Infamous criminals such as Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and Doc Barker were among the inmates housed at the isolated prison, contributing to its fearsome image. Positioned in the middle of San Francisco Bay and surrounded by freezing, turbulent waters, the island prison was considered nearly inescapable. This reputation for security led to Alcatraz becoming the designated prison for exceptionally dangerous or high-profile offenders, as well as those with a history of escape attempts. Despite its seemingly impenetrable nature, 36 inmates made attempts to escape, including the legendary incident on June 11, 1962. Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin managed to escape their cells and disappear into the bay on a makeshift raft. Their fate remains unknown to this day, securing their place in Alcatraz lore as some of its most infamous inmates. The prison's reputation was further solidified by the notorious figures it housed. Number 1. Al Capone. Al Capone was America's most infamous gangster, rising to prominence during Prohibition as the leader of the Chicago outfit. Capone's reign ended with his 1931 conviction for tax evasion, which led to his eventual transfer to Alcatraz in 1934. Known for playing the banjo in the prison band, Capone's time on Alcatraz was relatively uneventful, aside from a 1936 stabbing incident by fellow inmate James Lucas. However, his declining health due to advanced syphilis marked his later years at the prison. He was eventually transferred in 1939 and paroled later that year. Alcatraz's history is filled with stories of other infamous inmates, such as Whitey Bulger, Doc Barker, and Alvin Karpis, as well as individuals whose lives inspired Hollywood films. These accounts highlight the penitentiary's role as a formidable symbol of the American justice system and its legacy as one of the most infamous prisons in U.S. history. Number 2. Harvey Bailey, the Dean of American Bank Robbers. In the 1920s, Harvey Bailey gained infamy as one of America's most prolific bank robbers, earning him the nickname Dean of American Bank Robbers. His criminal career began in 1921 at the age of 34, and he quickly established himself as a master of his trade. Bailey's ability to carry out daring heists made him one of the most feared figures of his time. Bailey's downfall began in 1932 when he was arrested for his crimes. However, he made headlines on June 1, 1933, by escaping a Dallas prison using the warden as a human shield. Recaptured shortly thereafter, Bailey was implicated in the high-profile kidnapping of oil tycoon Charles Urschel, orchestrated by George Machine Gun Kelly. This connection earned Bailey a life sentence, and in September 1934, he was transferred to Alcatraz, the newly opened federal penitentiary designed for the country's most dangerous and incorrigible criminals. Alcatraz, as described in an October 1933 Time article, was intended to isolate violent offenders like Bailey and Kelly, preventing their evil influences from spreading to other prisoners. Located on an isolated island in San Francisco Bay, the prison symbolized the government's commitment to strict incarceration practices for the most unmanageable criminals. Bailey remained at Alcatraz for 12 years, but little is documented about his time there. In 1946, he was transferred to another prison and ultimately released in 1964 after serving 30 years. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Bailey lived a quiet and uneventful life after his release, passing away in Joplin, Missouri in 1979 at the remarkable age of 91. His story is a testament to the wild lives of early 20th century criminals and their later transformations. Number 3. Whitey Bulger, Alcatraz's infamous mob boss. Whitey Bulger, a notorious Boston mobster and leader of the Winter Hill Gang, stands among the most famous prisoners to serve time at Alcatraz. Transferred to the island prison in 1959, Bulger had already spent several years in federal custody, beginning in 1956 for armed robbery and truck hijacking. Prior to his time at Alcatraz, Bulger was reportedly a human test subject in the CIA's MKUltra experiment during his incarceration at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. During his 3 years at Alcatraz, Bulger maintained a reputation as a model prisoner. He occupied his time by exercising, reading extensively, and taking classes in law and bookkeeping. In 1962, he was transferred from Alcatraz and later granted parole in 1965, after serving just 9 years of a 20-year sentence. Bulger's release marked the beginning of his rise in Boston's criminal underworld. By the late 1970s, he had ascended to the leadership of the Winter Hill Gang. His life of crime included extortion, narcotics distribution, and a series of murders, leading to his indictment in 1994. He evaded capture for nearly 2 decades, finally being apprehended in 2011. Convicted in 2013 of multiple crimes, including 11 murders, Bulger was sentenced to life in prison. In 2018, he was killed by fellow inmates in a West Virginia prison under brutal circumstances. Number 4, Neil McCauley, the real-life inspiration for Heat. Neil McCauley, another infamous Alcatraz inmate, inspired the 1995 film Heat. His criminal exploits and tense rivalry with law enforcement captivated public imagination. McCauley spent 8 years at Alcatraz, 4 of which were in solitary confinement. Upon his release in 1962, he immediately resumed his criminal activities. In 1964, McCauley orchestrated an armed robbery targeting a supermarket's armored cash delivery. However, the operation ended in a deadly shootout orchestrated by Detective Chuck Adamson. McCauley and 2 accomplices were killed, while a 4th was later captured. The events were dramatized in Heat, with Robert De Niro portraying McCauley as a professional thief navigating the tension between his personal ambitions and a life of crime. Number 5, Arthur "Doc" Barker. A fatal escape attempt. Arthur "Doc" Barker, a member of the infamous Barker Karpis gang, is remembered for his ill-fated attempt to escape Alcatraz. Sent to the island in 1936 for his role in a high-profile kidnapping, Barker joined a group of inmates in a daring breakout on January 13, 1939. The group managed to saw through their cell bars and reach the beach undetected, but their luck ran out when the fog cleared, revealing their movements to the guards. Barker was shot during the ensuing confrontation, sustaining fatal injuries. While initially surviving long enough to reach the prison hospital, he succumbed to his wounds the same day. His escape attempt highlights the grim realities of life on the Rock, where the risks of fleeing often outweighed the odds of success. Number 6, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. For nearly 3 decades, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was seen as inescapable due to its isolated location in the middle of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by cold, choppy waters and treacherous currents. However, on the night of June 11, 1962, inmates Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin pulled off one of the most famous prison escapes in history, leaving behind a mystery that endures to this day. The 3 men had been planning their escape for months, secretly carving through air vents in their cells and constructing a makeshift raft from raincoats. When guards conducted their routine morning check on June 12th, they discovered dummy heads in the escapees' beds, designed to fool them into thinking the inmates were asleep. The escapees' trail was short-lived. Pieces of their raft and an oar washed ashore on Angel Island, but no definitive evidence of their fate has ever been found. While most believe they drowned in the bay, theories persist that they made it to freedom and lived their lives in hiding. Number 7, Bumpy Johnson, the Harlem Godfather. At Alcatraz Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, a legendary Harlem mob boss, spent several years at Alcatraz following his 1952 conviction for heroin trafficking. Known for his sharp intellect and ruthless control of the Harlem crime scene, Johnson's time at the penitentiary coincided with the daring escape of Morris and the Anglin brothers. Rumors suggest that Johnson might have aided their escape by arranging a boat to pick them up, though no evidence substantiates this claim. After his release in 1963, Johnson returned to Harlem, where he was celebrated like a hero. His reign didn't last much longer, as he died of a heart attack in 1968. Number 8, Alvin Creepy. Karpis, Alcatraz's longest-serving inmate. A founding member of the Barker Karpis gang, Alvin Karpis was one of the most feared criminals of the 1930s. He earned his nickname, Creepy, due to his sinister grin and cold demeanor. Captured in 1936, Karpis was sentenced to life in prison and spent 26 years at Alcatraz, longer than any other inmate in the prison's history. At Alcatraz, Karpis worked in the prison bakery and frequently clashed with other inmates. Despite his criminal notoriety, he never attempted an escape. In 1962, as Alcatraz prepared to close, he was transferred to McNeil Island Penitentiary, where he crossed paths with Charles Manson. Released on parole in 1969, Karpis moved to Spain, where he lived until his death in 1979. Number 9. George Machine Gun Kelly, Alcatraz's pop gun outlaw. George Machine Gun. Kelly earned his nickname for his use of the Thompson submachine gun during Prohibition. A career criminal involved in bootlegging and robberies, Kelly became infamous after orchestrating the 1933 kidnapping of oil magnate Charles Urschel. Kelly demanded a $200,000 ransom and was ultimately apprehended just 2 months later. Due to the high-profile nature of his crimes, he was sentenced to life in prison. Kelly was transferred to Alcatraz in 1934, deemed too dangerous to remain in standard federal facilities. His records described him as a maximum security risk whose escape would shock the nation. Yet, contrary to his fearsome reputation, Kelly was regarded by fellow inmates as harmless, even earning the mocking nickname Pop Gun Kelly due to his penchant for embellishing his exploits. Despite his stories, he was considered a model prisoner. After 17 years on Alcatraz, Kelly was transferred to Leavenworth in 1951. He passed away in 1954, dying of a heart attack in federal custody. Number 10. Robert Stroud, the infamous Birdman of Alcatraz. Robert Stroud's life is a chilling story of crime, imprisonment, and surprising ingenuity. Born in Seattle in 1890, Stroud began his criminal career as a pimp in Alaska before committing his first murder at 19, killing a bartender in a dispute. Sentenced to prison for life after murdering a guard in 1916, Stroud developed a fascination with birds during his time at Leavenworth. Allowed to keep canaries and sparrows in his cell, Stroud bred birds and conducted detailed studies, publishing 2 books on ornithology. His avian expertise brought him brief fame, with many hailing him as an example of successful rehabilitation. However, his dark personality persisted. He was known for his violent temper and manipulative behavior. Stroud was transferred to Alcatraz in 1942 after authorities discovered he had been brewing illicit alcohol using his bird equipment. He spent 17 years on the island before being moved to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Missouri, where he died in 1963 at the age of 73. Stroud's story inspired the 1962 movie Birdman of Alcatraz. Ironically, Stroud was not allowed to see the film due to prison restrictions. Despite his fame, prison staff and fellow inmates regarded him as a dangerous, irredeemable figure. Alcatraz remains one of the most infamous prisons in American history, not only for its seemingly inescapable island location, but also for the notorious criminals who served time there. From gangster legends like Al Capone and Machine Gun Kelly, to escape artists like Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, the stories of these prisoners are etched into history and continue to fascinate us. Though the prison closed its doors in 1963, Alcatraz's legacy lives on as a symbol of both human resilience and the harsh realities of justice. Its stories of violence, daring escapes, and unlikely redemption serve as a reminder of the darker sides of society and the enduring mystery of those who dared to defy its walls. What do you think? Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survive their escape? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories from history. Until next time, remain curious.